From San Antonio, Texas, the home of VTDRB, this is an ODA presentation. Welcome to this session specially designed for certification engineers. I'm Julie Svoboda. Whether you are new to certification or have years of experience, the helpful information presented here will feature methods, processes, tools, and requirements for successful project completion. Different narrators will be participating. You will see their names at the bottom of the screens. So let's get started with certification engineering training.
A certification engineer's job is to ensure the applicant shows compliance to every airworthiness standard and regulation that is applicable to a specific modification. To do this well, a cert engineer will be faced with a large variety of tasks, tracking, and research to fully understand and address each area completely. In managing the certification effort for a company's project, there are a number of tools and templates available to help accomplish the goal of an FAA approval. The full listing of where the tools can be found, general description, expectations, are posted in the certification job aid on the ODA SharePoint. This module, titled Tools, will help look at what's available and explain the general methods for using each. As a certification engineer working under ODA oversight, there is probably more emphasis placed on consistency and standardization than if you were working with an organization that only pursues FAA-managed projects. The reason the FAA delegates to an ODA is because of their required reliance on procedures, as defined in 14 CFR 183.57. The expectation is that procedures result in standardized outcomes, so the FAA can trust what will happen from one project to the next. Also, by using procedures, the ODA's performance isn't based on one individual, which actually makes an organization more effective and robust. From this perspective, if an individual leaves an organization, the performance should remain at the same level within the organization, since everyone is working to the same procedures. There should be no decrease in the ability to meet expectations. To achieve this consistency and standardization, the ODA expects the certification engineer to use the tools that have been developed to accomplish this objective. Even when serving as an agent for another company, our tools are to be used for tracking, communication, and documenting what occurred during a project. There are a number of databases, templates, and job aids that we'll cover in this module and explain how to use them and why. We won't cover everything though. To find out what else is available, look at the tool listing in the certification job aid, as you're expected to be aware and use everything that's provided when it's appropriate. All projects start with a planning effort. There are a number of databases used to support this planning, including project compliance, conformity, and unit member tracking. Separately, for major repair and alteration projects that are small in scope, there's also the MRA project database that will also support test and computation PMA projects in the future. And we're going to change the name to Small Project Database to be less confusing. We'll walk through each one, but realize we won't cover everything about the database, except remember, there's a job aid that's been created for every database that we use, and it should actually be checked to see how to do something if you haven't done it before. For example, I often get questions regarding the TIA in the Project Compliance database saying, it isn't printing quite right, or it doesn't show up like I expected it to. One of the steps in the job aid says to pull down the TIA tracking number from the document list, as this is a standard number in the template. But for some reason, most certification engineers seem to delete this entry. So the instructions say, if this is the case, add it back to the document list. Based on the number of calls I received regarding this issue, I know people aren't looking at the job aid. So try it. It might save you when you stumble on something that doesn't seem to be working quite right. Let's start with where you find the Project Compliance database. This is the database you'll use the most as a certification engineer, so being comfortable with navigation and how to make entries is extremely important. It's used by multiple people throughout a project and after an approval is complete, so it needs to be maintained well throughout the entire life cycle of a project and beyond completion. Templates are available for Part 23 and Part 25 projects and can be found in the ODA folder on the P drive under Templates. You'll notice that this is also where the job aid is located. Currently, the Part 23 database is only used for projects up to Amendment 62. A database will be generated for projects using Amendment 64 or later, but it hasn't been created yet because we haven't done that kind of a project. Training will be updated as needed to explain the differences that may be contained in the new Part 23 database based on those amendment level differences because they are quite significant. To use a template for a project, you need to save a copy to the working directory associated with the project effort. It's a good idea to rename the database something meaningful and include the project number.
Once you open the database, you'll notice that there is a switchboard to help with navigation and other buttons. One of these is the version history. Because we use this database so much during a project, updates are made all the time. You will know what version you're using based on the text on the switchboard. This is version 7, which was implemented on November 28, 2017. If the database you're using has an earlier date than what's in the template folder, you can find out what's changed by looking at the version history list by clicking on the button. Some of the updates are quite simple, and you can update your database to include the change or ask for help to get it added. Some are more extensive, so they cannot be added easily. This list helps you know what's been done. You will also see an Edit STC Checklist button. As mentioned in the Order 8110.4 module, there are certain certification steps that make up the path to approval. This checklist is used when planning to define who will be doing which tasks and is then tracked through a project as they are completed, noting who finished the task and when. This checklist will be checked regularly by the Project ODA Administrator, POA, to see how things are progressing, and it should be asked for at key milestones as shown in the Show Me list discussed in the Certification Job Aid. Because this is only a useful tool if referred to often, do not leave it until the end of the project to complete. The intent is to remind the certification engineer of all the steps that need to be taken so that nothing is missed. The other button you'll see on the switchboard is for opening the revision tracker. Once the project's certification basis is established, as defined in the project-specific certification plan, we'd like to think we're set in understanding the regulatory requirements. Sometimes the project scope changes, we learn we've missed something, or maybe the FAA has asked that additional rules be included. The revision tracker is used to list those types of revisions that occur as documented on the Project Certification Basis Change form found in the Forms directory or on the ODA SharePoint. This information is used when developing the final project compliance report so we can explain how the defined requirements were changed as the project progressed. Next, you'll notice the list of actions you can take in the center of the screen. It's ordered in a way you should walk through entering project information, starting with Add Project Information. From this screen, you will enter information regarding the project scope, stakeholders, tasks, and project unit members. There are dummy entries in most of the fields from when the database was created. To make sure all the relationships stay intact, it's best to edit what's in a field rather than deleting and starting over. Most of the fields are pretty self-explanatory, but if something isn't clear, the job aid will describe what to include in each area. The text in blue provides helpful hints as well. Some things to be aware of are that the information entered is used to populate a number of forms, such as a CPN, Certification Project Notification, or TIA, Type Inspection for Authorization. So you may need to edit an entry to make it fit well when the form is printed. Also, each field is used in some report or query somewhere, even if you're not sure where. So fill out all fields as best as you can. When looking at the Project Tasks Activities tab, you'll see a number of dummy items. After updating with all the relevant tasks and activities for your project, if there are extra line items left, it's okay to delete those dummy items. Don't leave information that's not related to the project as it is confusing. For the final tab, Project Unit Members, what you see is just a list of all assigned project members. To enter project members' names, click the button to the right that says Enter Project Unit Members Info. Also, before entering project member names, make sure team members proposed has been coordinated with the POA using the project team proposal form. Since the ODA is responsible for making assignments, POA signature is required to show agreement with unit members that will be used. From this screen, you'll notice that you can print the CPN form for coordination with the OMT, as well as a statement of work for each unit member. The CPN should print after entries on this screen are complete, but the SOW collected information that still needs to be entered, so you should wait until the database is fully populated. When printing, it's best to cancel on the pop-up window so that you can check the entered information first. Then export to PDF rather than printing so that you can save a copy. Also, one quirky thing about printing the UM statement of work, you will be asked for a last name many times. It is probably easiest to type in the name and copy it so that you can paste in the several pop-up screens that will show up. It must be entered each time. Don't click on Cancel or the SOW won't populate fully. Once the project information is entered, the next step is entering the anticipated documents for the project. As mentioned earlier, leave the TIA item that is automatically in the database if a project will have flight testing. It's needed to generate the TIA and TIR. Enter the document information exactly as it appears or will appear, because this will be used to generate 8100-9 approvals later in the project. The planned release date is used to let project participants know when to expect to see a document and should be updated so people know when something is sliding. The document date is the date shown on a cover page or revision history. It's an identifier date and may or may not be the same date as the document is released by document control. Check the box for items required to be complete and approved prior to TIA. These are for areas affecting safety. So if, for example, all structural substantiation must be complete prior to TIA, but damage tolerance analysis, because it's looking at the life cycle of the airplane, is not required prior to TIA. The UM review start date is the date something is set for unit member review, not engineering review. So if a unit member is also providing engineering services and they are providing support beyond just UM reviews approvals, the start date is when they begin a review for review approval for the ODA. Hyperlinking is described in the job aid and is used throughout the database. Right-click and select Edit Hyperlink. Browse to find the document that you're linking. Notice that the text display box shows the address of the file you just found. You can delete all the folder information and only show the file name, then click OK. It's that simple to hyperlink. The next step in database entry is selecting the applicable regulations. You'll notice that the first item shown is for PNR responses. This is where we track items the FAA may have asked when they responded to our project notification. This information is also captured in the project compliance report. After the first entry, you'll find each regulation for the FAR part we're working in. We discussed how to determine the certification basis in the Order 8110.4 module, and here is where it's captured for tracking purposes. As previously described, once the project scope is defined, you can review each regulation to decide if it's applicable or not. To help with this process, we've developed a CERT basis spreadsheet showing common requirements for similar projects that can be found in the ODA Job Aids folder under Reference Documents or in the ODA SharePoint Certification Job Aid. This is good to use to learn what normal looks like for most of the projects we see. This isn't a cookie cutter, however, as there's always slight differences in what's included in a project the aircraft being modified, and amendment levels. You'll still need to work through each one to determine if the regulation is applicable or not. This tool should help you get started. When you have a requirement that is applicable, change the CCL plan field to APP. The explanation field is for notes to yourself, maybe to capture why you think it's applicable or not, or reminders for which document you want to show compliance in. Also change the compliance status field to STC needed, MRA or PMA if appropriate, during the planning phase. While the project progresses, the status will be changed throughout, with the ultimate goal to end up at compliant, exempt, or ELOS. From this screen, you can also click on the twisty at the left and select the document where compliance to the regulation will be shown. This can be multiple documents if needed. From there, you can click on the twisty and select which unit member will be making an approval for that document and that regulation. You can enter multiple unit members as well. Once you have all the applicable regulations identified with their corresponding documents and approving unit members, you have the compliance checklist developed and ready for tracking. From this point, the next step is to review the available FAA policy and guidance material. The template is updated at least quarterly to make sure the latest information is provided. Check the box if you think it applies to the project. If you don't know, go to the RGL website and look it up and read the document. Some older pieces of guidance material are still applicable today, and some items don't apply because of specific design elements. Don't just include something because you're not sure, nor are you creating a list of reference items, meaning that if we ever mention an item anywhere in the project, we need to include it here. This should include the guidance we are specifically using for this project. There was a recent example where the policy and guidance list in a plan included everything that had the word software in the title, but there was no software review approvals in the project, so software guidance was not applicable. The next button, Update Project Tasks and Activities, is the same information entered when you initiated the project information. This is a quick and easy way to keep the information up to date, like when something slides and the plan has changed. Everyone involved in a project is interested in the schedule as people try to shuffle priorities, plan for what's coming, and stay informed about progress. As a certification engineer, you have most of the information regarding schedule and need to communicate it with everyone else. Keep this portion of the database up to date as it's pulled into an overall project schedule for everyone to see. The next button is for flight testing and is used to generate the project's TIA, TIR, and risk assessment portion of the TIA. The normal tasks used for the TIA and risk assessment are included, but can be changed if the project warrants. Folks seem to not know where commas and quotation marks go when entering documents. It's already been added, so follow the grammar provided in the template. Also, when generating the TIR, the flight test pilot will provide information to you to enter into the database. When everything is entered and it's time to sign the TIR, you are the preparer and the flight test pilot is the approver. We'll skip the Report button briefly to discuss the EASA button. From this button, you can look at the FAR requirement and EASA compliance standard side by side to understand differences. The CS difference designation shows how the FAA and EASA view the differences where EQ means equal. Non-SSD means there's differences, but they're not significant, where SSD means they are significant. VI notes a validation item that they are likely to review. Based on the regulations that you said are applicable, a corresponding compliance checklist can be generated showing the EASA requirements instead. Now for the reports. There are a lot available, so much so that access limitations make us use 3 switchboards to list them all. And even then, they aren't all listed, so others are found in the navigation pane. Document reports and additional reports are the other lists. The first listed is the 8100-9 form that is to be generated for all project approvals. I used to allow UMs to write up their own, But I'm seriously against this now, as we've had so many mistakes when people try to do it themselves. The database is intended to keep track and has proven to be more effective than humans in this instance, so all UMs should sign an 8100-9 that you generate. You can update document approvals in this screen if you prefer it to other options available. You can print out documents that are late being reviewed by the UMs or due within the next 7 days, as well as where items stand with regard to planned release dates. This is helpful information to communicate with unit members to keep them informed. You can print out the SDC checklist from here too. In the additional reports list, there is an amendment comparison to show which rules are at different certification basis than an airplane, a compliance checklist, a compliance report, a list showing what compliance items remain open, the P&R items that are tracked and their status, the policy and guidance you noted as applicable, as well as the potential guidance that could be applicable to a regulation because it's applicable to the project. All of the reports are available to understand some element of the project. During the planning phase, you should send out the PSCP to unit members for review, but also include a printout showing the document report with regulations and responsible unit member, as well as the potential guidance that may be applicable to the project, so they can help determine if we included everything properly. Beyond the reports that are available directly from the database, data is also pulled from the database each week to provide overall global reports on the ODA SharePoint, so that there is visibility to everyone about the work they're assigned, status, and schedules. Since these tools are intended to keep many people informed, to track the status of all aspects of the project, and ensure everything is completed as expected, the database has to be kept up to date. If you're not updating the database daily or nearly daily, you're probably falling behind. All of the fields in the database are used for something, so make sure you're filling them out, updating when something changes, and closing out items as you go. This makes the tool work for you and is beneficial in staying on top of the project. If you do not use the database properly, you'll find the workload at the end of the project overwhelming, and you'll miss things along the way, which can end up resulting in a finding against the ODA. Though mistakes happen, don't let a finding occur because you didn't keep up with the database. Remember, there's a job aid available if you forget how to use the database. It walks through all areas step by step.
Just like the project compliance database, the first step in using the conformity database is knowing where to find it. However, in this case, there are a couple of other tools available, all of which are found on the ODA SharePoint site. Before using the database, the first tool to actually use is the Data List Assessment tool. Realizing that the data list will likely grow throughout a project, many times for a large project, the expectation is that the known design list is initially assessed to determine what conformity is necessary. And then, as things are added to the design, they are also assessed for conformity purposes. Items that have been previously approved, such as through a PMA, TSO, or earlier STC, do not need to be conformed again, nor do items that do not contribute significantly to form, fit, or function. If a part or assembly will affect a test or evaluation, it needs to be conformed. When making an assessment, the ODA is interested in special processes used, new vendors, and unique design features. These should be included in the proposal for what is and is not conformed by the ODA. Because the ODA determines what it is that needs to be conformed, unit members with function code 11070 should review and agree to the proposal.
Once the proposal has been agreed to, the information can be entered into the conformity database so that the conformity inspection plan can be generated. There is a job aid available explaining the details for data entry. Just like the project compliance database, the conformity database is used to track and status everything related to inspections and airworthiness certificates throughout a project, so needs to be kept up to date regularly. Order 8110.4 requires that we are able to provide status of all conformity items, so we use this data in many ways. Accessing the conformity database is different, however, in that we store the file used by everyone on the ODA SharePoint. You must check out the file to make sure no one else is making database entries at the same time you are, because if that happens, someone is going to have their inputs overridden. An email notifying all users that you're checking the file out helps everyone know if the database is available or not. Once checked out, download the database to your computer to use. Like the project compliance database, the switchboard order of buttons is intended to guide a user through the way data is entered, starting with entering project information. The tabs on this page are also set up in the order you work through them. After entering project information, you can read through the default information offered in the CIP areas and update as needed. One area to note is how agents for the applicant are identified. VTDRB, as an agent to the applicant, or the applicant, issues letters to all inspectors who are performing company inspections. Each inspection agent must be vetted to make sure they have the experience, training, and background to accomplish the job appropriately. There will be likely an agent for each supplier identified. If not, the applicant will need to perform the inspections. The tab for airworthiness certification is often overlooked because it normally happens at the end of the project, but this also needs to be planned for early in the project, as it is a separate set of functions the ODA performs, and not all inspectors have the authority. An aircraft normally has a standard airworthiness certificate, which means the airplane meets its type design and is shown to be airworthy to fly. However, once something has been modified, it no longer meets type design until an approval is in place. So when we change the airplane to prototype and test during a project, its type design is in limbo and is no longer known to be airworthy. When a company performs flight testing, they are conducting research and development to make sure their updates are safe and compliant. To do this, an experimental airworthiness certificate is used for R&D tests. When R&D testing is complete, an experimental airworthiness certificate to show compliance is issued so that the ODA, FAA, can conduct their testing. When concurrent flight testing is done, the company hasn't completed R&D testing, so that airworthiness certificate is not appropriate, and only the show compliance certificate will be needed. After all testing is completed and the STC has been issued, the airplane can be found to meet approved type design and airworthy again, so a standard airworthiness certificate can be issued again. All of these steps need to be counted for in the plan. However, depending on the amount of time flight testing takes, it may be so short that the airworthiness unit member can shirt pocket the standard airworthiness certificate, meaning they will hold on to it rather than sending it to the FAA. The rule of thumb is that if it will take longer to send in the certificate and get a reissue from the FAA than to hold on to it, it's okay to hold on to it. In these cases, a new standard airworthiness certificate isn't issued. The old one is reinstated instead. The next tab is the planned number of conformity requests. The trick is to not identify too few and miss known suppliers, but also not to guess too many will be needed and then have to cancel lots at the end of a project. The number should line up with the assessment created pretty well to show that there's a good understanding of what suppliers are providing, what needs to be tested, and the major needs of the installation. The project unit members listed will be those who the POA has assigned to the project and will be potentially needed to review and disposition unsatisfactory items discovered during the inspection process. Only the primary unit members in a technical discipline review and concur with a TIA. Most RFCs are not completed until later in the project, not during the planning phase. The job aid covers what information to enter, as well as the FAA Form 8120-10 has instructions that can be helpful. Some key pieces include identifying where the inspection will take place as the company, which is not always the same as the applicant. Providing special instructions to the inspector. One item that defaults is a reminder that the IUM should email a scan or photo of the 8130-9 before they leave the premises of the inspection. These have been lost in the past and are hard to recreate, so we are trying to make sure we have the record. In the RFC design details, the rule of thumb is to identify what needs to be conformed at the highest level possible. This is normally the design list that will be called out on the face of the STC certificate. In the case of an installation, the top design list would be the drawing and the installation or configuration would be called out as the part number. For parts and assemblies, the top design list may not be specific enough to list as the drawing, so you'd need to use a lower level drawing. It should be able to be connected to the top drawing though, so it's easy to see how it relates to the overall modification. Special instructions or remarks can be used to explain the connection when needed, like the approvals for these drawings are found here. When deciding which forms the IUM will provide in response to the conformity request, the 8130-9 and 8100-1 are automatically checked because they will be provided every single time. The choice you make is regarding whether an 8130-3 airworthiness approval tag is needed. These are always needed if a part must be shipped from one place to another, but only when shipping is necessary. Finally, the reviewed by entry should be those unit members who reviewed the data covered by the RFC, the ones determining what conformity is required, function code 11070. The POA is always the approver. RFCs can be generated from the database and sent out via DocuSign for the review process. Make sure and include the IUM to receive a copy of the final signed version, as that is what initiates his ability to start an inspection. Often, the agents who are conducting the company inspections are new to the conformity process. We have a couple of items to help them out. One is a video module explaining the process. It's under 10 minutes, so you can send them the video link for them to watch to help explain what's happening. Also, from the database, you can generate the 8130-9 form for them. They can sign it or use it as a template to make sure the form they use is properly filled out. Nearly half of the errors found with conformity packages are related to this form not getting completed correctly, so make sure to help them out so we get it done correctly the first time. 8130-3 forms can also be generated and provided to the IUM for use. Send them so that they can choose to use them, whether it's the form they sign or use as a template. As mentioned earlier, tracking conformity and being able to status where a project stands with its inspections is an order requirement. The last tab provides a way to do exactly that. Note that you receive the 8130-9 as requested on the RFC, the date the inspection was completed, if you've received the conformity package and when, who is reviewing the package for errors, and when the request was made. Review information will either be entered by the reviewer or provided depending on their ability to access the database. A report for this information can be generated at any time. In looking at the other line items on the switchboard, there is a list of suppliers used. Check to see if your company is already on the list, as we don't need double entries. Once everything regarding a project is entered, a conformity inspection plan can be generated. This is exported as a Word file, where you can copy-paste it into the PSCP and edit as needed. Remember to include edits in the database so that when the final reports are created at the end of a project, the same mistakes are not made again. The item for review conformity packages is the area those reviewing packages can track their work. The reports available include a full list of everything conformed during a project, the suppliers for a project, all RFCs issued for a project, which packages each reviewer has, work accomplished by the ODA during a period of time, and an open status report. These reports are used to close out projects, give updates to the FAA, and help keep visibility on the work to be completed.
The unit member tracking database is easier to use than the others because of the fact that no one's allowed to make any edits to the database except for the lead ODA administrator, with the caveat of the annual survey soliciting certification engineering feedback on working with all unit members. The database is found in the same place as all other databases, the database folder on the P drive in the ODA section, or there's also a secondary version on the SharePoint. In the same fashion as the conformity database, to add information like survey responses, you'll need to download the file to your computer, make the inputs, and then upload, replacing the file that's on the site. One of the things that's been apparent in past audits is that certification engineers haven't regularly used the information in the database to know what a unit member's authority is. So people were added to project plans without anyone checking to see if the UM could actually support it. And then the UM said, well, you put me on the plan and it got approved, so I must be authorized. But that's not really how it works. When proposing a unit member to the POA early in a project, a certification engineer should have reviewed the UM's authority to make sure that it fits with the project's needs. Verify that the person can approve process specifications or system safety analysis before suggesting that the person's going to do so. All information regarding a unit member can be found from the very first item in the database switchboard titled Open Unit Member Records Form. From there, you'll be presented with tabs of information regarding the person of interest. To search, use Control F and type in the last name. Make sure to use a wildcard or an asterisk after all searches. From this screen, you'll find the appointment status, contact information, function codes for the ODA, special functions, and specific regulations that someone's authorized, even limitations. Information changes regularly, so make sure that you check the database often so that you know the appointment status hasn't changed or the authority hasn't been expanded. The final database used by certification engineers is the one intended to be used for major repairs and alterations, or actually small projects with less than 20 regulations to track for compliance. The database is intended to help streamline smaller projects and make development of PSCPs and compliance reports simple, so that it will also be used for test and computation PMA projects once the ODA is granted that authority as well. If a project is more complex than 20 regulations, use a project compliance database instead. One feature that hasn't been included in the database yet, but is planned with the next rollout, is the addition of the 8100-9 generation function. The job aid will be updated to include this additional functionality as it's embedded in the database. As with every other database, the job aid that explains how to use it is located in the same location as the database and provides step-by-step information to walk a user through each screen. You'll find this one on the ODA SharePoint.
When entering the new small project database, in keeping with the simplified intention, you'll notice the switchboard is much simpler than previous databases we've reviewed. The flow of the switchboard is the same. However, the top button, Edit Project Information, is the only one where data entry can be made. All other buttons are related to report generation. The first screen is where you enter the project information, whether it's for an MRA project or a test and computations PMA project. The top portion of the screen requires you to fill out all the fields and choose which type of project you're working on. Then there are 3 tabs that you work through. General information is relevant to all projects. This is where you'll enter the relevant tasks associated with the project schedule, including the estimated completion date and actuals for both start and completion dates. Just like other databases we've discussed, you're expected to fill out the fields and keep them up to date so we can use the information to communicate about the project to everyone in the ODA. You'll enter a list of the documents used for the design and compliance showings for the project. The data entered is used to generate an 8100-9 form for approvals, so make sure the information is accurate. Policy applicable to the project is selected from the pull-down menu. Include all relevant FAA policy and guidance. This is updated on the same quarterly schedule as other databases, so should be current. The Unit Members tab shows you the people you've selected. However, this screen isn't where you should make selections. Instead, select the button titled Open to enter UMs using Technical Discipline Filter. From this screen, you can enter the unit members the POA has agreed should support the project, as well as additional information regarding the work they are expected to perform to support project needs. This information will be used to generate a statement of work. Similarly, the tab for Applicable Regulations is a listing of the regulations you've chosen, but the screen isn't where you make your selections. Instead, click on the button titled Enter Project Regulations. From this screen, you can select the regulation, enter amendment information, method of compliance, status, and include any relevant notes. The final tab is for Approval Tracking, which works the same as the Project Compliance Database. You can click on the twisty to open up the information related to the document shown. Then, select the regulations associated with the document. The next level of twisty allows selection of the unit member making the approval. Scrolling through the documents allows you to work through each one individually. You will also use this screen to enter information about the approval, such as notes or dates, when you're ready to generate an 8100-9. For a major repair or major alteration project, or MRA, there is a separate set of tabs to enter data in, the first being Modification Facility. The questions regarding whether we're working with a foreign modification facility or on a foreign registered aircraft are some of the early big hitters, as we must ask the OMT to coordinate with foreign civil aviation authorities in these cases. For timeliness of a project, this needs to happen as soon as possible. The tab for Aircraft Specifics also includes fields for foreign registered aircraft. These are the same fields, just different ways of viewing them. The tab regarding MRA Guidance Review is referring to the FAA published Major Repair or Alteration Job Aid. If the project scope does not fit within the descriptions provided in the job aid for ENG or EVL, then an MRA project isn't appropriate. We need to be able to show why we think it's appropriate by including the reference information. Finally, look at the project question list answering yes or no. One question to pay attention to is, are instructions for continued airworthiness addressed? MRA projects handle ICA differently than STC projects in that the ODA does not accept ICA. It's not even a function available because the modification facility is responsible for either preparing an acceptable ICA or an acceptable impact assessment showing that the existing ICA is sufficient. It is not okay to mark the box yes without having one or the other completed, starting with specific information required. For test and computation parts manufacturer approval, PMA projects, they have a different set of tabs to complete. The first tab, Project Information, has fields that are specifically for a T&C PMA as defined in Order 8110.42 and the ODA Procedures Manual. Be descriptive when answering the questions, even though the box size may seem too small. This information is part of the project plan, so needs to be complete and accurate rather than short and sweet. The second tab is a spreadsheet type of screen showing what part will be replaced by the PMA part. The information is used to generate the PMA supplement, so must be accurate. The number of the supplement is tricky, as we can't skip numbers, but an earlier project may be delayed, so a later project is approved quicker. We need to make sure we issue supplements in order, so the supplement number field may need to be updated. Information on this screen can be cut and pasted from an Excel spreadsheet that has the exact same formatting for columns. There is a template available to help with this process, which can be useful when there are multiple parts. PMA projects require a safety assessment of a part failure and its effect on the next higher assembly and aircraft as a whole. The Safety Assessment tab supports this review with a Failure Modes and Effect FMEA section. Select a failure mode, then describe what would cause the failure and what effect that failure would have. Include a severity classification and mitigations for each failure mode. The next three tabs work together to develop the conformity inspection plan. Questions are asked about the quality system and how introducing this part or parts affects the current processes that are in place, so that justification is documented for taking no action or showing that updates are necessary. The tab regarding conformity risk assessment looks at specifics about the part and helps determine why or why not conformity is needed. This information should be considered when completing the fields in the Conformity Inspection Plan tab. With all of the initial project information entered, edits can be made using the same screen, Edit Project Information. Make sure you only edit information on the project you're working on by finding it first. It's easy to start entering project information before realizing the first screen is an actual project and you're probably overwriting the wrong information. Click on Control F and find your project information before typing. From the switchboard, as mentioned earlier, all the remaining buttons help you generate project reports depending on the type of project you have. You can look at a specific document to see what information will be printed on the 8100-9 before printing, or see what needs to be edited in the project information area first. Then, select the 8100-9 you want to print by clicking the button. Use pull-down menus to get the one you want to print. If there are multiple regulations associated with an approval, you'll have that many copies of the form generated that are identical. As a database quirk, when printing to a PDF, select Options to only generate the first page of the form. You can generate the MRA project plan from the MRA Reports button, again selecting the project from the pull-down menu. MRAs do not require a signed statement from the company, like an STC, to meet
21.20
requirements. However, the company representative, often the certification engineer, signs the PSCP to signify that no falsification of application, reports, or records has occurred as defined in 14 CFR 21.2. Specifically, summarizing the regulation, it says that no person shall make or cause to be made 1. Any fraudulent or intentionally false statement on any application, 2. Any fraudulent or intentionally false entry in any record or report that is required to show compliance, etc. When you sign the 21.2 statement, you're saying nothing is falsified. There are more reports available under the PMA button, as the items we've already discussed can be generated individually from this screen. When opening the project-specific certification plan, you'll see that none of the other forms are embedded, but all are needed in the project data package. Refer to the documents in the plan to connect the dots. The last report available is the compliance checklist, formatted in a slightly different way to make it easier to check that all the appropriate regulations are aligned with the right documents and unit members. Provide this report to unit members as a way for them to spot check the accuracy of the compliance checklist. Remember to upload the database to the ODA SharePoint after you've entered or changed data, so that when the next person uses the database, they're starting with the latest information. Otherwise, your inputs will be overridden and lost. Then, check the database back in so that others can check it out in the future.
We also have tools that are the templates used for most of the repetitive documentation needed for the ODA. Letters for project notification, OMT closeout, PMA application, and approval letters are all in template form. Project-specific certification plans, parts-specific certification plans, and project compliance reports all have templates available as well. All of the templates are written to address the requirements of Order 8100.15 and the ODA Procedures Manual. That doesn't mean that the templates cannot be revised to fit a project, however. If there's something in the template but it's not applicable to a project, there's no reason to include the information in the document. For example, the OMT closeout letter lists all of the items that we're required to provide, such as a signed AFMS. But if a project didn't involve an AFMS review and approval, there'd be no reason to include that bullet item in the letter. It becomes confusing to know whether it's included in a submittal or not with the bullet left in place. Another example is the schedule provided in the PSCP template. It lists a number of tasks that are typical for a certification project. That doesn't mean that all of the items must be included. For example, a project that has no flight testing doesn't need to list the line items for a TIA or completion of flight testing. That's really silly. It's also okay to add information that may not be included in the template, like multiple tests. For example, if we were doing seats, DO-116, and flammability, adding schedules for those makes sense. Even though all of these aren't necessarily included in the template, it's good information to add to communicate with everybody that's involved in the project. The thing to remember when using a template is that they aren't to be used blindly and without thought. You still need to understand the requirements and how they relate to the template information, and how the project you're managing fits within the information provided. The big picture is that the right message is conveyed and the requirements are met. Use the templates to accomplish this. In talking about databases, job aids were mentioned as available for each of them to explain their use and how to navigate different ways to enter data and track. In addition to the job aids developed for the databases, a number of other items available as referenced in the ODA folder for job aids. Most recently developed a regulation standardization checklist for interior and avionics projects to help initially developing a project's certification basis. There's also a test plan checklist that defines what needs to be included in all test plans and that should be used by everyone who prepares a certification test plan. Many of the job aids are also available in the ODA SharePoint certification guide. Because there's so much information in the SharePoint, there's a video module that covers SharePoint navigation, and it should definitely be reviewed to understand where things are found in the ODA site. It's updated regularly, so should serve as a point of reference whenever a question comes up.
As a certification engineer, there are two places you should be more familiar with than any other within the SharePoint: the certification job aid and the sites you manage for your projects. You should read through every item in the certification job aid and refer back to the information regularly, just like you should also read and refer to the ODA procedures manual regularly. Both items provide information on how to accomplish your job. The certification job aid is set up for each phase of a project, from planning through closeout, with additional information on validation, lessons learned, and how to use SharePoint. When beginning a project plan, the certification job aid provides links to FAA information that are valuable for developing the certification basis and understanding concerns the FAA may have up front, causing issue papers, how to approach certain aspects of the planning process, as well as personas to use when writing to help you understand your audience better so that you recognize you're not writing a plan or certification document for your understanding, but theirs. Information about the next steps are captured in project initiation, like what's expected in a familiarization meeting and coordinating with the FAA. The project coordination and conformity tabs offer insight into how the ODA makes conformity decisions, what's needed to pre-position parts, and offers a list of show me items to provide to the POA throughout the project. The Compliance Review section has a place to capture tribal knowledge, explains when trip reports are needed, documents SSA standards, and how to accept data from foreign authorities. The Testing section has the test plan checklist, provides information needed on an 8100-9, and the process for using test witness alternates. Airworthiness certificates are described, giving information on what to look at during an audit and what happens when someone shirt pockets a standard certificate. Flight testing speaks to AFMS formatting, and project records include information on how the ODA files are kept accurate. All of the information is intended to be used by certification engineers. To help unit members use the tool, it is also helpful to send links to information that may be needed during a project, so they also are aware of and can rely on what we've collected as well. The second big area you need to be familiar with is the project site that is used to communicate to the certification team. This includes the POA, unit members, and certification personnel. Since this is the only location where project information is made available to external team members, it must be up to date, accurate, and used as a tool to keep everyone aware of project information. When sending emails to unit members, send links to the SharePoint site so that they are reminded where the information resides regularly. In making the communication useful so that people use the site, you are expected to make regular updates, where we shoot for doing it at least weekly. At a bare-bones minimum, the site should include all the team members and their contact information, the most recently released PSCP, and current project notebook items like a 4x4 project summary sheet or dashboard, the schedule, and the status report of all documents. There's also a lessons learned section that anyone should be able to make inputs to for things that may crop up and need to be remembered, things that have gone well, things that didn't go so well, places where we need to make improvements. We're all looking for that kind of information. As for making inputs, the whole site is open for all team members to provide updates and edits. The idea is collaboration, so there's no limits in that regard. The newsfeed section is used in this fashion, where information from the ODA status meeting is summarized, but any project information can be included. It's okay to let the team know of upcoming meetings, give each other high fives, ask a question. Use it to keep people in the loop. Inside each site is also an area to track red lines provided by unit members so that everyone has visibility of where things stand. This is really a subset of information regarding document status. This area has not been used consistently, but it is expected to be used as a way of communicating the progress made on incorporating feedback provided. The process is explained in the certification job aid.
As we wrap up this module, recognize that we have only touched on a few of the tools that we have in place to make our processes standardized. Remember, there's a full listing in the certification job aid, and expectations are included. It's hard to remember to use tools that you don't know exist, so that is an expectation. Read through the list so that you know what's available and when something should be used. This doesn't mean you're stranded on your own and you have to know how to use everything. If something doesn't make sense, ask somebody. We've got a lot of really knowledgeable folks that can help. If something seems burdensome, let's discuss it. We're always making improvements. So let's fix things that don't work right. And finally, don't skimp. More mistakes are made when we try to go around the process, like updating a compliance report, but not going back and making the update to the database, or whiting out an RFC so you can get it issued, but not carrying the information through so that everybody's aware of the changes. This happens on IUMs on occasion. These kinds of things are what create more problems in the long run and take time, a lot of time to fix, rather than just doing things right to begin with. Let the tools help us get the results we're looking for.